So recall that you are one of countless sentient beings, and see yourself as one of that incredibly large group. So you have the Buddha nature, the possibility to become a Buddha, but being one among so many people who have that quality, you are also not so important. Because all those other people want happiness and not suffering. And so when we think of following the path of cultivating virtue and abandoning non-virtue, we have to think of this happening within our being part of this one enormous group of sentient beings who want happiness and not suffering. And considering that all these beings have been kind to us, that we're able to stay alive in this life and in previous lives, and they will be kind in future lives. So considering all this, just thinking, I'm practicing the path for my own benefit, doesn't seem right. We're intertwined with all these beings, and seeing our dependence on one another, we want our actions and our thoughts to be something that brings peace in their minds and in their lives. We want our spiritual practice to be something that will be directly useful and beneficial to them. And so in this way we generate bodhicitta and aim for full awakening. So in one way, we're completely dependent on others, involved with others. Yeah, we can't go it alone. But in another way, when we're born, when we die, we experience birth and death and misery ourselves. Yeah. So we're alone, and we're also together with others. Mm-hmm. Okay, so people who've been here for more than one EML course know that I usually the first day start talking about the Buddhist life. So I didn't do that yesterday, so I should probably start doing it today. And the reason of starting with the Buddha's life is because his life is a teaching. Yeah, it's not just that he lived and that's his biodata, but his life, how he lived, was a teaching in itself. And I think there's many parallels in his life to our lives in some ways. In some ways, of course, completely different, but in some ways very similar. Okay, so the Buddha was born as the son of a ruler, of a republic in ancient China, ancient India, okay? And he was destined to become the next ruler of that. He was trained in that way. He was expected to grow up and fulfill that role. And he also had all the pleasures of a prince and a king to be. Yeah, he didn't suffer from lack of anything. Okay, so in some ways, this is like our lives. Now you might say, "Oh, but my family was poor, and we didn't have this, and we didn't have that." No. Well, of course, Buddha's family was poor in comparison to other rulers who had much more wealth and so on. And if we look at our own lives, growing up in first world countries, most of us, some of us not, then we had quite comfortable lives. Maybe not ideal, maybe not full of total luxury, but we ate. We had an education. We had a place to sleep at night. We had medicine when we fell ill. And our parents wanted their best for us as their children, at least their version of the best. Okay, just like the Buddha's parents had their version of what he should become. So our parents have their version of what they wanted us to become. Anybody here become the kind of kid that your parents wanted you to be? Yeah, no? Yeah. Gee, our poor parents, huh? They had these wonderful expectations that we would have everything they didn't have. And then we came along and we didn't necessarily want that stuff. And we told them so. But their wish was for us to have everything they didn't have. And they had hopes and dreams for what they wanted us to become, maybe following in their footsteps in terms of careers and whatever. And we went off and did different things. And we didn't bother us, like I want to do this, and so I do that. I do it, So the Buddha kind of followed the recipe from his parents for a while and tried to be the ideal child. Maybe some of you did too for a while, until age, what? Some of us 14, 15, 16, and then finished. But at the beginning, we tried to do what pleased our parents and to fulfill their wishes because we cared about them and because they were the ones who took care of us. And so the Buddha did the same. And our parents tried to protect us from everything harmful in the world. They didn't take us deliberately into a war zone or a pandemic area, or, they didn't deliberately move us to a poor community so we would have that experience. So similarly, the Buddha's parents gave him everything, and tried to shelter him from from the realities of the world. Our parents basically did too. Of course, they couldn't shelter us completely, but that was their wish. So same for the Buddha. But the Buddha grew curious about the rest of the world. And so he did what some of us did when we were younger, was he snuck out of the palace. Yeah, maybe we didn't sneak out of the palace, but we, went on our own way and did what we want and made up some story to tell our parents so that it sounded like we were doing what they wanted, but in actual fact, we weren't. Ring a bell? Okay. So the Buddha snuck out of the palace. He wanted to experience the world. And so the first time he went out with his, of course, he went out in a chariot, like we may go out with in a really nice car. We don't because when you're a teenager, it's give me the car keys, but don't tell me what time to be home. So mom and dad, I'll take the car keys, I'll go wander around and explore, and don't tell me what time to be home, and I will make up some story so that you are assured that I am not doing anything dangerous. Yeah? And so off the Buddha went with his charioteer. And the first time he was out, he saw somebody who was old. And he was quite shocked by that. Yeah. And in our society, old people are sheltered away, aren't they? We don't see them very much. We do this in the name of caring for them so that they can have the nursing care that they need. Yeah. But it functions so that younger people don't have to see them, and they don't have to relate to people who are older, who are infirm, who cannot do what they used to be able to do. Yeah, and the Buddha was quite shocked in the same way that some of us are shocked when our parents age, when we see the elderly, like at the beginning of the pandemic, all of a sudden, oh, you mean there's people in nursing homes who, and remember, because the virus spread rapidly through nursing homes and so many of the elderly died, we had never thought that there were nursing homes with all these people in them. Yeah, we were just blind. We're into our own generation and our music and TikTok and, it's not rap, and well, rap is still popular, but what other kind of music, whatever kind of music it is, you're into that and, trying to be a TikTok star. Yeah. So, you do all of that. And when your parents say, let's go visit Uncle Chester in the hospital, or Aunt Ethel in the hospital, you say, I don't have time for it. I'm busy. I have my life. And it's a little bit, if you look carefully underneath, it's a little bit scary to think of going into the hospital and seeing, or going into an old folks' home and seeing somebody who you knew as young and vibrant as now, not able to do things and somewhat senile. Because these used to be the people you relied on that were, your guide to wisdom. And now they're saying all sorts of things that don't make so much sense. Okay. The second time he went out, he saw people who were sick. Yeah, so that's when your parents say to you, let's go visit Uncle Chester and Aunt Ethel in the hospital. Yeah, they have cancer, they have kidney disease, they have, who knows what, sepsis. Let's go visit them. And inside, it's again, I'm busy, I have my friends, they're waiting for me, I've got to do these other things. Yeah, for the first time in your life, you want to do your homework. Because it's scary going into a hospital and seeing people who are sick. If you haven't been in one and you walk in the room and somebody is hooked up to so many tubes and so many machines and monitors and picks, that join in their various veins and arteries, and it's scary. Yeah, the machine is beeping, it's going like this for their EKG and their EEG, and it's like, oh my God, what's going on here? Yeah, and they're so sick, and they, here's somebody who used to be vibrant, you used to go play tennis with your mom or dad or, whatever you did, and now they're just, or your aunt and uncle, and now they're just lying there, okay, and sick. It's uncomfortable seeing that. Yeah, we'd much rather not see that. Okay, then the third time the Buddha went out is he saw a dead body. And even in India today, very often in train stations, you will run across dead bodies and aging people and sick people. And he didn't know what a corpse was because he had never been exposed to that in the palace. Just as he was shocked to see an old person, shocked to see a sick person, because these were totally out of his experience. And so, too, when you go to your first funeral as a kid, or maybe, your pet dog or pet cat dies, and it's like, what happened? Where did they go? They aren't here. There's just this body, and then they take the body away and bury it in the ground or throw it in a fire or something like that. And again, if you have no background, this is really rather scary. Yeah, the first time you ask your parents, are you going to die? Am I going to die? And your parents kind of try and find some way to say, well, maybe, but we're going to make it not happen. You'll be safe, because they don't want us to worry. I remember where we lived when I was a kid, in one direction, to go out that one direction on the highway, there was a forest lawn forest lawn cemetery. Okay. And I remember asking my parents, what is that? What is a cemetery? What happens there? And they were clearly uncomfortable replying to that question. Yeah. It's a place where people go to sleep for a long time. Yeah, well, yeah, they're very uncomfortable. And so, the Buddha was shocked at seeing a corpse. And in our culture, we dress the corpses up. Now, one of my friends, high school friends, her mother died of, what's the cancer of the blood? No, Hodgkin's. She died of Hodgkin's, yeah. And she had been sick for a long, long time. And I went to the funeral to support my friend. And people there were saying, oh, because it was an open casket. And of course, they had done her all up. She had been really sick for years. They had done her all up, and they said, she looks so nice, now. It was all phony, of course, with the chemicals they put in, and they make up and did her hair and whatever. Yeah, because we don't like to look at death. We don't like to think about death. Yeah. So it's shocking. So the Buddha was also shocked by this. Yeah. Then the fourth time he went out, and so these are called the four messengers, The fourth time he went out, he saw a mendicant walking in the streets, somebody with an alms bowl, wearing old clothes, walking down the streets. And he was asking his charioteer, what is that? Yeah. Kind of like, I don't know if you've had the experience I have, of walking down a street in the West, and a little kid, you hear a little kid go, Mommy, who's that person? Or, Mommy, that lady doesn't have any care. Daddy, that man's wearing a skirt. And so people don't know what to do with it. But so he was also startled too, like, what in the world is this mendicant? I'm a prince. I have, he's dressed in all his finery. He has all his earrings and, jewelry and everything. And he's never come across anything like that. So his charioteer also explained, what death was. What aging, sickness, and death, and then explained what the mendicant was. It's a person who is seeking a way out of the cycle of existence. Then he started thinking, cycle of existence, samsara, what is that? Oh, you get born again and again and again. And he's saying, but you mean I get born again and again and again, and every time I get old, and I get sick, and I'm going to die, and then I get born again, and I get old, and I get sick, and I'm going to die? And the charioteer said, yes, and that's what this mendicant is trying to reverse. So the Buddha went back to the palace that night. Of course, he had married this gorgeous woman. Yeah, of course, princes have to marry. They're always the most handsome, athletic, whatever, sexy guy. And their wives are always the most gorgeous women, because that's the story, isn't it? Yeah. And they had just had a child. And, in those days, you could have many wives, and you had, what's the nice word? Not a prostitute, a consorts or courtesans. Yeah. So he had a whole group of dancing girls, who had entertained him. And he's sitting there thinking about aging, sickness, and death, and then all these dancing girls, and it's like, what's going on here? And then at the end of the show, all the women fell asleep, and of course they're all sprawled out on the floor, and their mouths are open, and they're snoring, and they don't look so good when they're like that. What happened? These are supposed to be the gorgeous, Ivanka Trump women. I think she looks like a plastic doll. Personally, when I look at her, something looks quite plastic. Anyway, And so he has this memory of aging, sickness, and death, and then he sees what happened to his dancing girls. And then he said, he remembered the mendicant, and he said, I have to go out and explore this and find out what is the key to get beyond this cycle of life and death. So he asked his charioteer to take him out. So he's still wearing all of his finery, but, again, sneaking out of the palace, going back and kissing his wife and son. He had a boy. Of course he had a boy. Princes only have boys. They don't have girls. Yeah. So he kissed them goodbye without waking them up, tiptoed out the door, and he was gone with his charioteer. And after he got out a certain distance, he took off all of his finery. He took off all the jewelry and ornaments. And in those days, the men had very, very long hair. And so you'll often see pictures, of the Buddha's renunciation, where he's lifting his hair up like this and with his sword cutting through, And because many of the, the mendicants in those days, they shaved their beard, they cut their hair, okay? And others were long-haired, matted hairs, ascetics, who had hair down to who knows where that was all curly and dirty and wrapped around, and you can still see those people in India. Okay, so he went out and he cut his hair and left all the finery and tried to seek for some spiritual guidance on what to do. So he found one teacher and studied with him for a long time. And that teacher, I forget what level of samadhi he had attained, but quite a high level. And so the Buddha followed his instructions. He, gained that level of samadhi. And then he said, yeah, that's really peaceful. It's really nice, but I'm not liberated from samsara yet. So he wanted to leave. Of course, that teacher said, oh, but you've achieved the same thing I have. You can be the leader of the group. I will step aside. You're young. You be the leader of the group. Now, any young disciple would be, oh, goody, I get to be the leader. He didn't buy it. He left. Okay? I mean, he paid his respects to his teacher. He was grateful for that, but he knew he had to continue searching. Then he found another teacher who actually had, accomplished an even higher level of samadhi, somewhere in the form realm, gave the Buddha instructions. The Buddha was not a Buddha at this time. I keep saying the Buddha, but he was a bodhisattva. So I'll say the bodhisattva. So the bodhisattva, practiced according to that teaching, attained the same level of samadhi, and again realized he wasn't liberated. So he paid his respects to that teacher, who also offered him the leadership of the group, but he declined and he left. And so he continued wandering, and he met up with 5 other ascetics. And so they, formed a group together and went to a very pleasant grove, and they meditated, And since they were ascetics, they ate 1 grain of rice a day, okay? And they became so thin that when they touched their navel, they could feel their spine. Okay, pretty thin, So he developed all these ascetic, he did all these ascetic practices, thinking that oh, since I have so much attachment to my body, if I make the body uncomfortable by doing these ascetic practices, then I won't be so attached to it. That was his thinking. And we see that thinking with many people, you know. I just have to clamp down on the body and on its urges, and that way it'll free me from attachment to the body. So he did that for 6 years, yeah? And then he realized, that's not liberating me from the attachment to my body. I'm still attached to the body. Asceticism like that torturing the body doesn't eliminate the attachment in the mind. So he said goodbye to his 5 ascetic friends, who were calling him names as he walked away, saying, what a cop-out you are, you're such a softy, you don't want to really be an ascetic, you gave in, and you're going to go eat now, and what in the world are you doing, you're such a, you're a loser. Okay? So they were all criticizing him. That didn't faze him. Yeah, he walked away. And he sat down under a tree to meditate. And a woman came along who had some sweet rice. And this is often served in the monasteries nowadays in India. It's rice with milk and sugar, yeah. Usually brown sugar in it. And then nowadays they put raisins and bits of Tibetan cheese, the very hard cheese in it. But it's, reminding us of what the Buddha ate. So he ate, and he accepted the food from her. He ate, and then his body had more energy, and so he felt, he was able to concentrate better, and so he went off walking again. He crossed the river. Nowadays it is a dry riverbed, but he crossed the river and then found a beautiful banyan tree, a Bodhi tree, and sat down there and said, I'm not going to get up until I have attained full awakening. So he must have had a lot of confidence to say that, And so he sat down and he's meditating. He sat down in the evening, he's meditating. And so Mara, who is the anthropomorphized version of our afflictions, Mara manifests all these soldiers and monsters and terrifying beings who attack him. And, the idea being to scare him off. I think, was it the weapons and so on first? Yeah, that was first, okay. Yeah, and so, to scare him off. But through the power of his wisdom, he transformed all these weapons, all these monsters and things appearing to his mind all around. He transformed them all into flowers. Yeah. So when you have nightmares, this is what you should do. You transform the whole thing into flowers. And then these flowers just showered down on him. Yeah. Very nice smelling, very peaceful, very gentle. So Mara failed that time. Next time, Mara, so that was testing the Buddha's anger and adversity. Yeah. Next time, Mara has all of his daughters, the really sexy, gorgeous one who are coming out doing their thing, dancing everywhere and, I don't know what they do in strip joints, but something like that. Yeah, really testing his attachment, and he didn't fall for it. He wasn't attached to them, and he transformed them all into old hags. Okay, and then they scattered off. And so he sat there and continued to meditate. And then at dawn of the day, then he completely purified every last affliction, every last defilement in his life, in his mind, and became a Buddha. Okay? So after he became a Buddha, he didn't just sit there. I mean, he sat for a little while, continued his meditation session. And then he got up and he thought, and he started walking, and he said, who in the world is going to believe what I just experienced? Yeah, nobody is going to believe this. Everybody is totally immersed in trying to get samsaric happiness. If I tell them what I just experienced, they're not going to believe it. So he thought, okay, that's it. I won't say anything to anybody because they won't understand. And then the gods, okay, Brahma, Vishnu, all of the Hindu gods came and knelt down and with their palms together requested the Buddha to please teach. You have the key to end the suffering of the world. Please teach it for those who have little dirt in their eyes. Yeah, because dirt in your eyes is like afflictions in your mind. So there's some people who don't have a lot of dirt in their eyes. Teach them. So he thought, okay, who has little dirt? So he thought of his first teacher, and then going to teach his first teacher about what he discovered. And then he found out that teacher had died just a day or two before. So he thought, I'll go visit my second teacher. And then he learned that teacher had also just passed away a couple of days before. And then he thought, okay, what am I going to do? Who has little dirt in their eyes? So then he thought of his 5 companions. And he started walking toward Deer Park near Benares. Okay, So he started walking there. It took several days to walk from Bodh Gaya to Benares. And then he saw his 5 friends, sitting there in the grass, And when they saw him, they said, there's that Gautama, that one, he's such a softy. He walked out on us. He's a chicken. He's a loser, When he's walking our way, but when he gets here, don't pay any attention to him. Don't offer him a seat. Don't offer him any water, okay? Because this was the common courtesy. You lived outdoors in ancient India, by and large, so you always offered water and a seat when somebody came walking from far away. Don't give him anything, yeah. But as the Buddha approached, his radiance, his vibe, so to speak, made them stop, and they automatically offered him a seat and offered him some water. And they talked and asked him, well, what have you been doing? And he told them, and he started describing the path as he had realized it from his own experience. And at that time, there was one of them that became a stream enterer. I can't remember who became a stream enterer or whatever. But anyway, by the end of his giving teachings for a few days, they were all arhats. Okay? And they were his old friends who had, of course, called him names when he left. And then from there, he wandered throughout India in all different sorts of places, and people would ask him for teachings. Okay, so they didn't write invitation letters. They they didn't send out flyers and announcements. They didn't put something in the local newspaper. It's just Buddha came and a teaching happened. It was all very organic and spontaneous. And people from all walks of life came to the teachings. And he tuned in to his particular audience and what is their interest, what's their disposition, what is going to make sense to them, what do they need to hear at this moment. And for him, he just tuned into that because his wisdom was so sensitive, his omniscience was, saw that. So he wasn't sitting there going, well, that guy looks like, he had trauma, so I'm going to talk this way. And that one looks like they come from a rich family, so I'm going to talk to him this way. None of that, It's just who he was as a person came. He just talked and shared what he had learned. And they say that each person heard what they needed to in their own language when the Buddha spoke. Okay, so they didn't need a translator. Okay, didn't need dictionaries. Just people understood. And he taught everybody. So he taught from all ranks of society, When you look in the Pali scriptures, he would talk to poor people, he taught to kings, he taught to Brahmins who were high on the ladder of the caste system. He talked to everybody, okay? And there were all sorts of people in ancient India, and he had a heart that was open to include all of them. So some of them were pretty weird, like the matted hair ascetics, okay, who, their hair is matted and it's filthy and they're wearing dirty clothes and they smell, and he taught them. And then there were the people, I forget what the name for them was, but they acted like dogs because their philosophy was if you acted like a dog in this life, you're using up your animal karma and you could be born as a human being in the next life. So they would approach the Buddha. They walked on all fours. Approach the Buddha. You know how a dog walks in a circle before they lie down? They would lie down on the ground, put their hands out. They would eat, if they were offered water or food, they would lap it up like a dog. And the Buddha taught them too. He didn't go, you guys are nuts. Like, get out of here. I don't want to be seen with you. He didn't do that. He just opened his heart and talked to them. And so he walked all over northern India doing this. And again, he gave practical teachings to the people who wanted practical teachings, and he gave philosophical teachings to the people who needed that. Yeah. For example, there was one couple who they were very happily married, and they wanted to be husband and wife in their next life. And the Buddha taught them how to create the karma to do that. He didn't say, you guys, come on, get out of samsara. Why do you want to do this again? He didn't say that. He taught them, how to create the karma to be together in their future life. And sometimes he would wake up in the morning and he would just think, often he would think about the other ascetic groups or other mendicant groups, and because the Jains were very popular at that time, and also other groups. And he would say, I wonder what those disciples of Jain leaders, Nagrantha, what are Nagrantha's disciples doing now? And so before he went to go on Pindapat to collect his alms, he'd go and find some of the Jain disciples, and he'd sit down and say, what were you guys talking about? And they would tell him, and then he would comment on it. Yeah. And it's quite amazing how he managed to touch a lot of people. And slowly, I don't know how slowly, sometimes it sounds quickly, he developed quite a following. Some were lay followers, but some wanted to be monastics. And so the Buddha ordained them, you had to have your robes, you had to cut your beard and your hair, and you had to have an alms bowl. And then the Buddha would just say, come, O bhikshu, and you were ordained. It was very simple, okay? After, and so the Sangha of monks began to proliferate. And after, I think it was 6 years, he went back to Kapilavastu. That was the home area where he grew up. And he thought to teach his parents and share it with the Dharma with the people there. And, when he left, there were like 500 of the, his clan was Shakya. 500 of the Shakya clan men, followed him and to be ordained. He said, come on, bhikshu. They ordained, and then he left. And he went to Vasali. But meanwhile, while he had been at Kapilavastu, his mother had died right after he was born. And so his aunt took over the role of raising him. And his aunt was interested in the Dharma, and she brought all the Sakya women when he was teaching in Kapilavastu to listen. And of course, 500 Sakya women decided that they wanted to ordain too. So the monks and the Buddha had gone to Vasali, and the women said, hey, we want to ordain. And so they followed the Buddha. So this was the first large women's march in history. Yeah? When they say 500 in the scriptures, it means a lot. So these women, who were all high society women, took off their nice clothes, they put on rag robes, they cut their hair, they left their jewelry behind, and they walked barefoot from Kapilavastu to Vasali, dressed as mendicants, dressed as monastics. Okay, so like I said, the first large women's march. And if you can imagine this in ancient India, because even in Indian society now, in many people, the woman is when she's young, she is the property of her father, who makes all the decisions for her. When she's married, the husband. And when she has sons, because she's got to have sons, otherwise they cast her out, then it's her son who takes care of her and gives her instructions and tells her what to do and so forth. Okay, so these women all went alone, which was unheard of. Yeah, and they get to Vasali, where the Buddha was, and they saw Ananda, who was his attendant, and they said, "We want to request ordination from the Buddha." And Ananda went and told the Buddha, and as in the story it says, the Buddha said, "Better they don't ask," and came back and told them that. And they, Mahapajapati, Gotami, his aunt and stepmother, again asked again. And then on the third time, I think it was, when the Buddha, when Ananda went to the Buddha, he said to the Buddha, "Can women attain awakening?" Yeah, because if they couldn't, well, that's the reason why the Buddha wasn't ordaining them, because there was no hope. And he said, "Yes, of course they can." So, so Ananda said, "Well, then shouldn't they be ordained? Let them be ordained." Yeah. At first, the first time the Buddha had said, "Better they don't ask," Ananda said, "But she was your stepmother, she nursed you, she raised you. Shouldn't you repay her kindness by letting her ordain?" And the Buddha said, that was worldly kindness, but, we're talking about something different here. But when after the next time when the Buddha asked if they could attain realizations, when Ananda asked and the Buddha said yes, then he said yes, So as the story goes, at that time, the Buddha said, "I will ordain them as long as they follow these 8 rules." Okay. And so the 8 rules are called the 8 Garu Dharmas, meaning the 8 heavy points, the 8 heavy factors. So among them is, if a novice monk comes, even the bhikshuni is 100 years old, she should prepare a seat and offer him something to drink. A nun should never point out, admonish, and never admonish a monk, point out something that he's doing that's not so cool. The nuns should be ordained by the monks. So there were these kinds of things as the story goes. And Mahapajapati said, "Sure, we'll accept them because we really want to be monastics." And so thus the order of nuns was founded. Okay. The Buddha continued walking and teaching and everything. There's, regarding that story about the founding of the nuns' order, how historical it is, we don't really know, because it's quite, first of all, because the different lineages, as the Buddha's teachings as they spread and then developed into different lineages of teachings, they have different numbers of Garu Dharmas. Yeah, some have 8, some have 16, and even the 8 among the different traditions are not always the same. Okay, so there's the scholars question, is that something that actually happened, or is that something that was written in later? Because it appears that after some centuries in India, I think it's called the Manu rules. There was a shift in society, then the Manu rules, something like that, further restricted women's ability, to go around in society. Anyway, she accepted that, and the nuns' order started. Yeah, and the nuns' order was because the monks' order was founded first. Then the monks were supposed to teach the nuns. Okay, but the Buddha also said that if a monk was not teaching properly and if they were not acting properly, then they do this thing of you turn the bowl upside down, meaning, we don't approve of you and we're not going to listen. So, yeah. So this is, to diverge a little bit from the story for a minute. So this is something that happened in Indian society in the 5th or 6th century BC. Yeah. If we look at current modern India, there's a better situation for women now, but still not completely equal to men. I mean, there's the women on TV who are, anchors for the news, and, they become doctors and lawyers and things like that. And the women are now riding tut-tuts, toot-toots, tuts-tuts, the little scooters, around India. And tuk-tuks, thank you, yeah, driving the tuk-tuks. And so they have much more freedom now, but still, especially in the rural areas, very much in the traditional way. But in our culture, now our culture wasn't exactly gender equal and has never been, but especially in the last few decades, there's been much more of a movement to make things gender equal. And so in spreading the Buddha Dharma to the West, I see that as one thing that we have to accommodate in terms of the society and societal values. Because in the West, if, can you imagine people coming to His Holiness's teachings in a big auditorium, and the women have to go to the very back of the auditorium and sit there, and the men are sitting in front, So the ushers are saying, oh, okay, you go back there and you sit in front. That's not going to go over real well, okay? And so similarly, if the men get education and the women don't, maybe in ancient India that worked. In Tibet, it worked. Well, worked. I don't know how well it worked because you're denying half of the human population the ability to learn the Dharma and progress on the path and be a benefit to others as they progress on the path. So, in how we run the Abbey, that is one cultural condition where we are doing it in a different way than how it was prescribed. Okay, because you really, you couldn't imagine. Somebody asked me that question once. She was saying, if you walked into a Buddhist center and you were told to sit in back, how would you feel? And if you were a donor and you saw all the women in the back, are you going to support that place? Somebody asked me. Yeah. So we have to do things different in this country. Okay. So, yeah. Maybe we pause here. You have questions or comments so far?
Thank you. So why did the Buddha turn down the suggestion of having of women ordaining? Was it just maybe the story's not quite accurate, or was there a purpose?
Okay. According to the story, after the Buddha let the nuns ordain, or let the women ordain, he said that this is going to be like a plight on the plight on a crop, that makes the crop die, and as a result, my sasana, my doctrine, will be shortened by, I think it was 500 years, something like that. Okay, and I think the idea was because in ancient India, men and women just did not mix. Yeah, they did. And, our society too, many places in the world today, men and women do not mix at all. And so I think the idea was that, the men and women, the monks and nuns would have, fall in love with each other and this kind of stuff, and it would make the doctrine decline. Yeah. So that is something to be concerned about, especially, we have a co-ed community here, but also we have many people here who are gay. So then what do you do? If you leave out one of the genders, then you have one gender, but a number of people are gay, so then do you make them go away? Or, it just becomes dysfunctional after a while. Yeah. And when I was first in Italy, and some of the monks were, I wanted to go meditate in the hall. You can't come in. I'm meditating here, and I can't be in a room alone with a woman. When I was talking to Lama Yeshe, I told him that, and he said, "Where are these guys going to go where there aren't women?" In other words, they have to learn to deal with their own energy, and Okay. Other, yeah.
Yeah, always when I hear this story about Brahma and Vishnu and so on requesting the Buddha, I wonder, do the Hindus know about that? And how do they think about, how do they relate to this?
Well, the Buddha is considered one of the avatars in Hinduism. So you find many of the very devout Hindus going to the Bodh Gaya Stupa and paying respect to the Buddha because he is one of the avatars of their own faith.
What is an avatar?
What's an avatar? How do you define an avatar?
An incarnation, embodiment, or manifestation of a deity. An incarnate divine teacher.
Mm-hmm.
But their doctrines are very different, so don't they get into conflict somehow?
No, they just follow their own doctrine. And the Buddha spoke about karma, how the two faiths speak about karma is different, but they both talk about karma. And that part is, in terms of creating virtue and abandoning non-virtue is quite similar. Okay. Other questions? Okay, so I really like telling this story because there's parallels with our own lives. And back to, let me go back to Brahma and so on, making the request. Why is that in the story? That would be like, Buddhism coming to the West, and God and Jesus and Moses and Allah all requesting the Buddha to teach. Okay? So it's the whole idea of, in the culture, that people who you respect as being the most spiritual now see the Buddha as fully awakened and as somebody who can teach them. And so that inspires faith in the general populace. Yeah. Nowadays, it's kind of political leaders, who do that. But, in ancient India, that's how it happened. Okay.
Venerable, I have this question about when a monk and nuns are staying together. Okay, so what are the precautions that we need to take note? Like for example, in the Theravada, they are very cautious on staying alone with the lay women or whatever. That what are the guidelines like?
Okay. So Theravada actually goes even, they have some customs that aren't even found in the Vinaya about this. So, for example, if a woman's going to hand something to a monk, she can't just put it out and he takes it. He puts a cloth down, she puts it on the cloth and takes her hand away. He pulls the cloth to himself and picks up the article. This is actually an old Cambodian royal tradition. It is not in the Vinaya, okay, but they practice that. So, I stayed at a Theravada monastery when I was doing the research for the Library of Wisdom and Compassion. And one day, the monastery was on the side of a hill, and they had a temple at the top, and I went up there and I was circumambulating. And when I was walking down, it started to rain. And partway down the hill was where the monks' residence was, off to the side. And there happened to be one monk standing there, and I'm getting wet in the rain, and he handed me an umbrella. Just, here's an umbrella. I took it, I opened it, I used it, I walked the rest of the way down. When I mentioned that to one of the Western monks, he was horrified. He handed you an umbrella? Oh, doesn't he know that he's not supposed to do that? This is terrible. I mean, he was really horrified. This same Western monk, when I was, because they would go on Pindapat in the morning, and I would do my practices while they were gathering the food. So I kind of had a good situation, But we had our breakfast, and then then we often talked. I talked with the monks, and you had to sit out in public and everything like that. And so I was talking with one of the senior monks once, and this same junior monk came to fill up, to offer water. So the senior monk had his water, this junior monk filled it, and he did not give me any water. Or, there was a lay woman with me. He didn't offer her any water either. So just sometimes going to this kind of extreme, that really isn't necessary. So what things are, here at the Abbey, what we have in place is we don't hang out, we don't go visit people in their bedrooms. And this includes whether you're straight or gay. If you're gay, you don't go visit somebody even of your own gender in their bedroom. Okay, so all these kinds of, if you want to talk to somebody, it's done in a public place. This is why we have windows in the doors of the library in Kuan Yin. Okay, and that's also really to protect, because nowadays you have people nowadays sometimes there is abuse, but sometimes there are people who make up stories of abuse that don't happen. But if you have a window and it's a public place, other people can see, and then, if something's going on, they can intervene. If nothing's going on and there's a false accusation, they could say, look, I saw inside and there was nothing. Okay, so that's one thing. we discourage people from going, when the younger monastics cannot go on walks in the forest alone with somebody who they might be sexually attracted to. So again, it doesn't matter if you're gay or you're straight. If if it's somebody you could be attracted to, you don't take a walk in the forest with that person. Yeah, all the old the old nuns, you can walk with us in the forest. We're old and decrepit, and we're not so sexy anymore. So, yeah. So things like that, and like with kids also, because sometimes people will make false accusations. Sometimes it's true there's child abuse, and sometimes people make false accusations. So, like if a couple come, they come with children, and the children want to see the cats. If you go into a nanda to show the kids the cats, you make sure there's somebody else there with you when you go in. Yeah, so you're not alone with anybody's kids. So that kind of thing. Okay, but we certainly can hand things to each other. Yeah. Catch. I'm joking. Okay, yeah?
I feel like if you have to be that extreme, then you might want to look at your mind, because like if you can't sit Miss Butterworth on the table with you, because you think she's sexy, then you might want to look at your mind. There's something not right there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the point, isn't it? Isn't it? And what you see in the text, and this is across all religions, is when a man is attracted to a woman, it's the woman's fault. Yeah? It's her fault. So it's a way of not owning your own attachment, not owning your own lust. It's that person's fault. Therefore, they are dirty. They have to stay away. They. And the whole point of the Dharma is it's not the other person, it's your own mind. Yeah, that's what it comes down. That's what I think the meaning of Lama's comment about where are they going to go where there's no women. Yeah. But I see, like some of my Theravada friends, when they go visit their family, they'll hug their father. They won't even hug their mother. Yeah. So I hug my dad. I mean, when he was alive, I'd go and hug him. No attachment to my dad. I hug my brother.
So, that's a good question. So, speaking of the life of the Buddha, knowing that his father constructed this set of buildings that were designed for every season, where the Buddha could not go out, and designed for him to have every pleasure and everything that he desired, not to see sickness or old age. So how did the Buddha's father did not to grow old? Because he would have had to grow old, and then the Buddha would have had to see signs of aging.
Yeah.
So how was that done?
Okay. So he left home before his father got really old. Yeah. So his father, he saw his father age, but his father probably had children when he was quite young, because people married at a very young age. So the father probably still looked comparatively young. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe they had some magical Botox then, Yeah. The story is a story. Yeah. And it's a beautiful story. It has a lot of meaning. So don't pick at the details too much. Yeah. There's another story coming back to your question about there were some monks at a river, and they were crossing the river, and there was a woman on one side. She needed to go. You know the story. Okay, well, I'll tell the story because maybe not everybody knows it. So she needed to cross the river. So the monks were going across. So one of the monks said to her, "Climb on my back, and I'll take you across the river." They didn't have steamboats then. So he took her across the river, he put her down on the other side, and then the monks continued walking on their journey. And after a while, the second monk said to the one who carried the woman, "Do you know that you just broke a very serious precept? You touched a woman, she was on your back, you carried her. This is really serious." And the monk who carried the woman said, "I put her down on the other side of the river. You're still carrying her with you." Yeah,